Carl Jung posited that emotional withdrawal isn't merely a state of depression or isolation. Instead, he identified it as the crucial, final psychological stage preceding the profound emergence of your authentic self. If you found yourself increasingly disengaging from others, losing interest in the usual social rituals, and experiencing a pervasive sense of apathy toward once meaningful pursuits, Jung suggested this isn't a sign of collapse. On the contrary, it heralds a breakthrough. You are not disintegrating, you are liberating yourself, and what unfolds next promises to fundamentally reorient your understanding of who you are and your intrinsic place in the world. Imagine a scenario. You are sitting in solitude, experiencing a profound sense of emptiness. Friends text, inquiring about your well-being. Family members voice concerns about depression. Yet you aren't sad. You are simply done. Done with superficial pleasantries, done with pretense, done with relationships that feel like an elaborate performance art. A fundamental shift has occurred within you, rendering you unable to re-engage with the superficial concerns that once held sway. This phase of withdrawal often feels unsettling, even pathological, precisely because contemporary society relentlessly promotes external connection as the ultimate metric of well-being. You are expected to network, socialize, and assiduously maintain a broad circle of relationships. The more connections you cultivate, the more successful you are presumed to be. However, Jung unveiled a truth that directly contradicts this prevailing worldview. Sometimes, the most psychologically healthy action you can take is to withdraw completely. Not perpetually, but for a vital, often uncomfortable phase of personal metamorphosis that most people never allow themselves to fully experience. Most individuals encountering this phase will label your experience as problematic, suggesting therapy, medication, or increased social engagement. Yet, Carl Jung dedicated decades to the rigorous study of this exact phenomenon, and his discoveries fundamentally redefine our understanding. This withdrawal isn't a mental illness. It is what Jung termed the capstone of individuation, the most significant psychological transformation a human being can undergo. You are not losing yourself. You are at last truly finding yourself. And the emptiness you perceive right now is, in fact, the fertile void from which your authentic self is poised to emerge. Here's a crucial insight Jung understood that is often overlooked by conventional therapeutic approaches. Your psyche possesses a finite reservoir of psychic energy. To construct what he called the true self, you must actively redirect energy away from the persona, the social mask or role you present to the external world. This process can be experienced as a profound sense of dissolution or even death, because in a very real sense, your old identity is indeed dying. But it is not destruction. It is a strategic rechanneling of vital psychological resources. Your unconscious mind meticulously reallocates energy from maintaining false relationships and manufactured versions of yourself, investing it instead into the cultivation of something genuinely real. Jung discovered that society often gravely misinterprets this process. When you withdraw emotionally, people typically label it as isolation, avoidance, or depression. Jung, however, referred to it as sacred detachment, a necessary separation from the collective consciousness, designed to facilitate the discovery of your individual consciousness. You are not fleeing from life, you are journeying toward your life, the one you were intrinsically meant to live before societal conditioning dictated who you should be. Throughout his extensive clinical work, Jung consistently observed this recurrent pattern. He meticulously documented how the psyche operates much like an intricate ecosystem with finite resources. When an excessive amount of energy flows toward maintaining social masks and meeting external expectations, the nascent authentic self languishes, starved of the vital energy it needs to flourish. The withdrawal phase, then, functions as the psyche's survival mechanism, initiating a shutdown of non-essential operations to preserve what matters most. a profound psychological triage. And it feels brutal because it is, in its very essence, a brutal but necessary process. Consider the metamorphosis of a caterpillar entering its chrysalis. From an external perspective, it appears to be a state of inertness, perhaps even death. The caterpillar dissolves into a formless biochemical liquid. Yet, this complete dissolution is absolutely essential for the subsequent transformation. Jung found that emotional withdrawal operates in precisely the same manner. Your old self must undergo a complete liquefaction before your new self can coherently form. The common mistake is to believe that the chrysalis stage should feel pleasant. It does not. It feels like nothing, a profound, unsettling void, a sensation that terrifies individuals who have spent their entire lives constantly feeling something, even if that something was chronic anxiety, pervasive fear, or an incessant drive to people please. What Jung discerned through decades of meticulous clinical observation is that this intricate process cannot be artificially accelerated or circumvented. The chrysalis stage unfolds according to its own organic timeline, taking precisely as long as it needs. Some transformations manifest over months, while others necessitate years. The duration is directly contingent upon the extent of your societal conditioning, the volume of false identity that requires dissolution, and how consciously and cooperatively you engage with the process. Actively fighting against it merely prolongs the suffering. Surrendering to its natural unfolding facilitates a more fluid and less painful emergence. Let me illuminate the identifiable markers of this unfolding process within you. First, small talk becomes a visceral, almost unbearable discomfort. You once navigated casual conversations about weather, weekend plans, and other surface-level topics with ease. Now, when someone initiates such an exchange, you feel your vital energy rapidly draining, as if siphoned through a sieve. This is not mere rudeness. Jung would explain that your psychological system actively repudiates superficial interactions because it desperately needs that precious energy for deeper, internal work. Your unconscious mind inherently recognizes that it cannot afford to squander resources on meaningless exchanges. Jung identified this as psychic economy. Just as your physical body conserves energy when ill, directing resources toward healing, your psyche conserves energy during individuation, directing it toward profound transformation. Small talk is no longer just tedious, it becomes acutely distressing because your entire system recognizes it as an energy drain you can no longer afford. Every minute spent discussing nothing is a minute stolen from the profound internal work your soul is striving to accomplish. Second, you cease blaming others because you embark on a profound confrontation with your own shadow aspects. Jung's concept of the shadow is absolutely crucial here. It encompasses all the disowned parts of yourself that you have rejected and consequently projected onto others. When you harshly judge someone as manipulative, you are often not solely perceiving their manipulation. You are, more accurately, seeing your own unacknowledged capacity for manipulation reflected back at you. During this intensely introspective withdrawal phase, these projections begin to falter. You can no longer sustain the comforting illusion that all problems reside externally because you are beginning to recognize that everything you've been battling in the world also exists within your own interior landscape. This recognition renders interpersonal drama simply boring. Empaths in this context are not broken. They are alchemists in progress. You once found yourself effortlessly drawn into conflicts, gossip, and relationship chaos. Now, it all seems like a form of shadow theater. Individuals locked in battles with externalized versions of their own internal struggles. You are not superior for gaining this insight. You are simply conscious, and consciousness makes unconscious games impossible to play. This is precisely why you feel such profound loneliness. Most people are still engaged in games you can no longer participate in. Jung observed that this fundamental shift in perception often creates what he called psychological homesickness. You experience a longing for a place you have never physically been, a way of living you have never experienced. You can sense its existence, but you are uncertain how to reach it. The people around you appear content with a surface-level existence, and you struggle to comprehend how they manage it. You attempt to articulate what you are experiencing, but words invariably fail to capture its essence. They might dismiss you as negative or overthinking, but you are not overthinking. You are, at last, thinking at the depth required for authentic living. Consider a compelling narrative illustration that perfectly encapsulates this dynamic. We observe this clearly in someone who spent years convinced their co-workers were inherently toxic and manipulative. They changed jobs repeatedly, always encountering a recurring pattern of interpersonal conflict in new environments. But during their withdrawal phase, something profound shifted. They began recognizing that what they had labeled as manipulation in others was, in actuality, their own rejected cunning, their own unacknowledged strategic thinking that they had been taught to suppress. Once this awareness emerged, the relentless grip of workplace drama began to loosen. They could finally perceive these patterns as manifestations of universal human struggles rather than targeted personal attacks. Third, you enter what Jung termed the hermit phase, a period he also described as the night sea journey. In ancient mythologies, the hero is often swallowed by a mythical beast or descends into the chthonic depths of the underworld, cut off from the ordinary world, alone in an enveloping darkness. Jung understood that this is not mere loneliness, it is a profound solitude precisely required for metamorphosis. You cannot undergo true transformation while clinging to all your old relationships and established routines. You need isolation in the same way a seed needs the darkness underground to germinate. Growth is happening in a hidden realm where no one, not even you, can yet perceive it. The night sea journey often provoked profound anxiety in Jung's patients because it feels interminable. You have no way of knowing how long this phase will endure, days, months, or years. Jung found its duration varies completely based on how consciously you navigate the process. Some individuals resist so vehemently that they extend their suffering indefinitely. Others learn to surrender to the dissolution, trusting that something new and vital will inevitably emerge. The key difference lies in whether you actively fight the withdrawal or consciously cooperate with it. Jung documented that during this phase, you might experience a constellation of remarkable psychological phenomena. Dreams become unusually vivid, rich in archetypal symbolism. Synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that appear to guide you toward an unseen destination, increase in frequency. You begin to develop what Jung called an active relationship with your unconscious mind, which communicates through a rich tapestry of symbols, archetypal images, and potent intuitive insights. Most people ignore these subtle messages because they are trained to trust only rational thought. But Jung discovered that the unconscious contains a profound wisdom that the conscious mind cannot directly access. Learning its unique language becomes paramount for successfully navigating the night sea journey. Now, here is the critical, often perilous juncture of this process, and Jung was very clear about its inherent dangers. There comes a moment when your persona undergoes an inevitable and complete disintegration. The meticulously crafted social facade you've worn to gain approval, avoid rejection, and function within society simply ceases to function. You no longer possess the psychic energy to sustain the elaborate performance for others. You cannot fake enthusiasm. You cannot pretend to care about things that have lost all meaning. You cannot force a smile through conversations that feel like a slow, agonizing death. This persona breakdown is terrifying because you have mistakenly confused the performance for the authentic self. When the mask cracks, you believe you are cracking. But Jung revealed something remarkable. Your genuine self has been stifled, suffocating under that mask your entire life. The breakdown isn't you falling apart, it is the false self finally releasing its grip, allowing the real you to breathe freely. The panic you feel is, in essence, the ego's desperate struggle to maintain its accustomed dominance. Something deeper is taking over, and your conscious mind, unfamiliar with this new authority, deeply mistrusts it. Let's examine a vivid narrative illustration that captures this experience. A composite example, drawn from commonly observed patterns, shows someone who constructed their entire identity around the archetype of the perpetually helpful and agreeable individual. They were the person everyone called in a crisis, the reliable friend who never said no. But during their individuation process, they found their physical and emotional systems utterly incapable of sustaining this demanding role. When people asked for help, their body would tense up involuntarily. When they tried to utter yes, the affirmative response simply wouldn't materialize. This was not the emergence of selfishness, it was the insistent voice of authenticity, finally asserting its rightful claim. Their helpful persona had been a highly elaborate and effective defense mechanism, and now it was collapsing to reveal a nascent individual replete with genuine needs, necessary boundaries, and previously unacknowledged limitations. Jung issued a profound warning. There is a vital, often misunderstood distinction to grasp here: the difference between dissociation and individuation. Dissociation represents an avoidance of reality, a retreat into disconnection from your body, your emotions, and your very life because you feel overwhelmed. Individuation, conversely, involves a profound confrontation with reality, so deep that you withdraw from false versions of it. You are not abandoning the world, you are leaving the illusion of the world that society has meticulously constructed. Dissociation is numbing, individuation is awakening. Even though the initial stages of awakening can feel precisely like numbness, how do you discern which you are experiencing? Jung advised looking at what you are moving toward, not merely what you are moving away from. If you are withdrawing because everything overwhelms you and you desire to feel nothing, that is dissociation. If you are withdrawing because the superficiality of conventional existence no longer resonates, and you are earnestly searching for something real and profound, that is individuation. One is escape, the other is a quest. Here's a critical, often unacknowledged controversy that Jung courageously confronted and that most spiritual teachers completely ignore. What if you remain in this withdrawn state forever? What if the isolation never ends? What if your new self never emerges, leaving you alone and empty until death? Jung called this the shadow of withdrawal, the inherent dark side of this necessary process. He warned that if you linger in the hermit phase indefinitely, devoid of conscious purpose, you risk two equally dangerous outcomes. First, a dangerous phenomenon known as ego inflation. You might begin to perceive yourself as godlike, believing you have transcended ordinary human needs for connection and meaning. You become spiritually arrogant, looking down upon individuals still trapped in unconscious patterns, while secretly you are merely ensnared in a different, perhaps more insidious pattern: spiritual bypassing dressed up as enlightenment. Jung observed this constantly in his clinical work. Individuals who utilized spiritual withdrawal to avoid the harder, more vulnerable work of cultivating genuine human relationships. Second, the devastating descent into total despair. You might conclude that nothing ultimately matters, that life is inherently meaningless, and authentic connection is an impossible fantasy. You give up, not with a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet, insidious resignation. You cease striving to find your people, stop believing they even exist. You settle into isolation, not as a temporary chrysalis, but as a permanent tomb. Jung called this psychological death without rebirth. The profound tragedy of someone who successfully dissolved their old self, but never managed to form a new one. Jung extensively documented these dangers in his writings on individuation. He observed that the withdrawal phase contains an inherent risk, a precarious razor's edge between genuine transformation and profound stagnation. The difference lies in whether you maintain what he called tension with the opposites. You must consciously hold the tension between solitude and connection, between death and rebirth, between letting go and reaching forward. If you succumb to the pull of one extreme, you become psychologically stuck. Ego inflation signifies a collapse into grandiosity, total despair, a collapse into meaninglessness. True individuation requires holding both possibilities simultaneously until something genuinely new emerges from the creative tension between them. The ultimate goal Jung identified isn't to abandon the world forever. It is to eventually return, profoundly transformed. The withdrawal phase is temporary, a necessary death before resurrection. You venture into the darkness, not to reside there permanently, but to retrieve something you inadvertently lost or deliberately suppressed. Your authentic self, your soul, your deepest purpose. Then, you bring it back into the world. You re-engage with life, but now you are connecting from your soul's core instead of through the pretense of your persona. The isolation concludes, replaced by a deeper, more profound form of connection that doesn't drain you because it is intrinsically real. So, how do you successfully navigate this intense phase? How do you ensure it culminates in rebirth instead of spiritual death? Jung developed a specific practice he called active waiting, or what Taoists refer to as wu wei, effortless action. You do not force motivation. You do not create artificial goals to make yourself feel productive. You do not pressure yourself to have everything neatly figured out. Instead, you wait actively, paying keen attention, staying present, and listening for what genuinely wants to emerge. This is, arguably, the hardest thing you will ever do, because Western culture has relentlessly trained you to always be doing something. Waiting feels antithetical, like wasting precious time. But Jung discovered that the psyche operates according to its own inherent schedule. You cannot rush individuation, just as you cannot force a seed to sprout by pulling on it. You create the optimal conditions for growth, and then you trust the process itself. These vital conditions are silence, solitude, and unwavering self-honesty. The process, in essence, is allowing your authentic self to emerge organically, without forcing it into a predetermined or socially acceptable shape. During this active waiting, you practice what Jung termed self-observation without judgment. You simply notice what genuinely interests you, without immediately attempting to turn it into a goal or a career plan. Perhaps you find yourself drawn to long walks in nature. You don't overanalyze why or transform it into a rigid fitness routine. You simply walk. Perhaps you feel an inexplicable urge to create something. You don't fret about whether it's good enough to share. You simply create. These authentic impulses are your soul speaking, and it communicates in whispers, not commands. Jung taught that the soul possesses its own unique intelligence, distinct and separate from ego intelligence. The ego relentlessly seeks to plan, control, and optimize. The soul yearns to express, explore, and deeply experience. During the withdrawal phase, the ego is weakening, and the soul is strengthening. This profound transfer of psychic power can feel disorienting and deeply uncomfortable because you have been ego-identified your entire life. Learning to trust soul guidance requires a radical act of faith in an unseen, immeasurable wisdom. But Jung consistently found that individuals who developed this profound trust emerged from withdrawal with an unshakable sense of purpose. Jung observed that soul motivation operates fundamentally differently from ego motivation. Ego motivation feels urgent and anxious, whispering, "You must do this, or something bad will happen." Soul motivation, conversely, feels calm and magnetic, gently affirming, "You get to do this," because it is an intrinsic expression of who you are. Ego motivation depletes you. Soul motivation energizes you. The withdrawal phase is intrinsically teaching you to distinguish between these two types of impulses. It is, in effect, killing ego motivation so that the authentic voice of soul motivation can finally be heard. Jung identified several distinct characteristics that differentiate soul-driven motivation from ego-driven impulses. Soul motivation is cyclical and nuanced, arriving in waves and seasons rather than being constantly available. Forcing it leads to spiritual exhaustion. It is profoundly collaborative, working with life circumstances instead of attempting to control them, often finding the path of least resistance rather than pushing against insurmountable obstacles. It is inherently mysterious, frequently not revealing its full purpose until after you have courageously followed the initial calling. And most importantly, it is sustainable because it emerges directly from your authentic nature and generates energy rather than depleting it. A compelling narrative illustration illuminates this crucial distinction. Consider a case profile that Jung would have recognized immediately. We observe someone who built their entire life around external achievement, relentlessly climbing corporate ladders and assiduously accumulating credentials. After a profound spiritual awakening, that meticulously constructed motivational framework simply dissipated. For months, they felt a profound disinterest in their former career trajectory. But slowly, different impulses emerged. A gentle pull toward creative work, a nascent interest in mentoring others, a deep need for solitude in nature that felt less recreational and more essential. These were not strategic career moves, they were soul callings emerging from depth, and following them felt less like discovering and more like remembering who they were meant to be. Here's what happens after the withdrawal if you consciously and courageously navigate this profound internal passage. You re-engage with the relational world, but with an entirely new paradigm. You are no longer performing. You are no longer people-pleasing. You are no longer accepting connections that demand you betray your authentic self. Some relationships will inevitably conclude because they were fundamentally based on false versions of you. This will undoubtedly cause pain, but it is a necessary crucible. Jung called this the sacrifice of the unlived life, the conscious release of who you pretended to be so that you can become who you actually are. But critically, new relationships become possible, connections Jung termed soul level rather than persona level. You encounter individuals who do not require you to wear a mask. They are attracted to your authenticity, not your performance. These new relationships feel completely different. They are energizing instead of draining, spacious instead of clingy, allowing for comfortable silence instead of demanding constant interaction. You finally understand what Jung meant when he famously said, "True relationship requires two individuated people who have found themselves before trying to find each other." Jung observed that individuated people possess an innate capacity to recognize one another instantaneously. There is an undeniable quality of authentic presence, a depth of being that defies mimicry. When you encounter another person who has traversed their own night sea journey, the connection is immediate and profoundly resonant. You don't need to explain yourself. They understand the terrain you've crossed because they too have crossed it. These are your true people, the ones you have been searching for your entire life, but you couldn't recognize them until you yourself became one of them. The qualitative shift in relational capacity following individuation is nothing short of profound. Jung noted that before this transformation, most people relate through a complex interplay of mutual projections and carefully curated personas. They forge bonds based on congruent facades rather than genuine selves. After individuation, this becomes impossible. You cannot participate in persona-level connection anymore because your once dominant persona has undergone a complete dissolution. This is why so many relationships inevitably end during this phase. They weren't truly real relationships. They were agreements between masks. And when your mask disappears, the agreement becomes void. The nature of your vocational calling also undergoes a radical reorientation. Before individuation, most people choose careers based on conventional external metrics such as financial gain, social status, or parental expectations. After individuation, you choose based on an intrinsic internal alignment. Jung called this incarnated purpose, when your authentic essence finds unhindered expression through your human life. You are not striving to become successful by external standards. You are allowing what genuinely wants to emerge through you to take form in the world. The difference is profoundly transformative, albeit subtly enacted. Jung emphasized that incarnated purpose does not always manifest in outwardly impressive or conventionally recognized forms. You might not achieve fame or accumulate vast wealth. You might not change the world in obvious public ways, but you will be living in profound alignment with your deepest nature, which Jung believed is the ultimate measure of a life well lived. The people around you might not understand your choices. They might think you are squandering your potential by prioritizing internal meaning over external affluence. But you will possess a knowing they do not. You will know what it feels like to live a life that is, finally, actually yours. Jung emphasized that this isn't about deriving your life's passion or discerning your calling through purely rational analysis. You cannot think your way to authentic purpose. You can only live your way into it. The withdrawal phase is actively cultivating the receptive space for your true purpose to reveal itself. When this happens, motivation transforms into an effortless, intrinsic drive because you are no longer swimming against the current of your own nature. But Jung warned about the potential pitfalls of romanticizing this profound journey. Living from soul purpose requires tremendous courage because it often leads you away from conventional success metrics. You might earn less money. You might receive less external recognition. Jung called this the sacrifice of the golden ego, the conscious release of attachment to external validation in favor of unshakable internal alignment. The profound culmination of Jung's insights regarding post-withdrawal life is this: the emptiness you're experiencing isn't the absence of purpose. It is, paradoxically, the presence of a purpose so authentic that your ego, accustomed to external directives, simply cannot recognize it. Your old motivations had to die because they were, in fact, preventing you from discovering what Jung called the life that wants to live through you. Everything that has been stripped away had to go, not because you failed, but because you succeeded in outgrowing a version of yourself that was never truly you. The awakening didn't kill your motivation completely, it killed your limitations. What feels like loss is, in truth, liberation. What feels like the end is, in essence, the beginning. Your primary endeavor within the Jungian framework is to practice conscious waiting. Spend time each day asking yourself what truly wants to emerge through you. Then, listen without judgment to whatever arises. Trust that your unconscious knows precisely what it is doing, even when your conscious mind struggles to comprehend the process. Remember what Jung discovered through decades of meticulous research. Authentic purpose cannot be intellectually figured out. It can only be lived into. You are not broken for losing motivation after awakening. On the contrary, You are being prepared for a motivation so authentic and powerful that it will transform not just your life, but the lives of everyone your life touches. Jung's ultimate insight is a profound paradox, simultaneously challenging and profoundly liberating. The emptiness following spiritual awakening is temporary but absolutely necessary. It is the sacred space between who you were and who you are profoundly becoming. Most people find it unbearable to tolerate this liminal space. They frantically endeavor to fill this void with immediate new goals, relationships, or hastily constructed identities. But Jung discovered that individuals who learn to courageously inhabit this liminal space of emptiness emerge as something entirely new. This is precisely what Jung meant by individuation, not improvement or optimization, but becoming the genuine, real version of yourself, the one that was interred beneath years of societal programming and conditioned expectation.